All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Jason Poling, class of '94. I serve as president of the Williams College Association of Maryland, and I want to welcome you to tonight's WCAM Zoom call featuring Melissa Osborne Groves, class of '93. Dr. Groves is associate professor of economics at Towson University, which some of us remember as Towson State University, and some of us may even remember as Towson State Teachers College. If you really want to date yourself, and I see Dennis nodding vigorously. Yeah, I think at least half of my teachers at Loch Raven went to Towson back in the day. We are doing this Zoom call as a way to stay connected as alumni, of course, to learn from one another. And it's especially exciting to do this in this year, the 200th anniversary of the Williams Society of Alumni. We are, in fact, the nation's oldest, possibly the world's oldest alumni association. And we're excited to celebrate this with a range of events. And we have on the call tonight, Rob Swan, class of '90. Rob has a slide with some upcoming events. And I can tell you our next Maryland event is going to be next month, April 12th. We are circling back to a couple of the doctors that we spoke with last year, early on in the pandemic. John Fielder, class of '94. His schedule permitting, Bo Soo Kim, class of, I believe, '92, and Marty Wasserman, class of '64, will be moderating that. And then coming up in May, date to be determined, Raf Donaldson, class of '09, who's on the call, will be doing that call in May. And I am sincerely hoping that by the end of the summer, we can do this sort of thing in person, perhaps at Camden Yards over a beer instead of coffee and lectures. But we're happy to do this tonight with Dr. Groves. And so, Melissa, let me just first ask, how did you get from wherever you were, which now we know was in fact a very, very wicked place, to Williams?
Well, I have to say it was. I have to give due credit to the cross country and track teams. So when I was in high school, after I had gotten all of my letters from the schools, I took one last visit to a couple of my, top choices that I had gotten into. Williams was one of them. And I came out, and the cross country and track coach, track was still in season. And I was running track for high school. So I had to get a practice in while I was visiting. And so they took me out on this gorgeous run. Sue Donna actually came with me. And the coach had told her, he said, stop at the top of the hill and let her look back over the hills and back to campus. And so I didn't think much of it. We're on this run on over 5-6 miles. We get to the top of this hill and Sue goes, yeah, we usually stop here just to look around. So we stopped. I mean, it's just breathtaking. I mean, just gorgeous. It was this beautiful, like early spring day and just lovely. And I got back and I said, look, I'm going to need to go back to the dorm. I got to make a phone call. And Mom, send the check, send the check, send the check. Of course, then Sue, when I came in freshman year, I said, gosh, can we do that run again where we stop on the hill? Said, we don't stop on the hill. What do you mean we don't stop on the hill? She said, we only stop on the hill when we got recruits coming in, that's all. So that's when I knew it. I mean, it was very similar to some of the smaller schools I was applying to. So it really kind of fit the mold of what I was looking for. But it was that culture that I was trying to get a gauge for. And the folks that I met were amazing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So and Sue was nice enough to run with me, which, I mean, it could have put me in the dust in the first 50 yards, but was kind enough to do the run with me. I don't even think she was sweating. But yeah. Mm-hmm. That's what I knew. Never look back. Mm-hmm.
And then how did you get from Williams to doing what you're doing now?
Well, I would have to give credit David Zimmerman in the econ department. I was an econ poli-sci major, really just took a couple econ because somebody told me I needed to. AKA my mother. But I was poli-sci. I took the LSATs. I was thinking about law school. That's where I was headed. And then I took the LSATs and I left and I said, if that's any indication of what I'm going to be doing, I'm not interested at all, at all. And I took a winter study course called Constitutionalism Without a Constitution, the Case of Israel. And I cried every day in that class. I mean, I just cried every day. It was just incredible. It just was not what I was looking for. And so I called my mom and I said, is it okay if I switch majors? I don't think I want to go to law school anymore. And she said, well, what are you thinking about? And I said, I don't know. And then David Zimmerman showed up. He was a new faculty member and he taught this course on poverty. And it was like, he had me at hello. I said, so I can apply all of these econ theories and techniques and methods in this context to deal with these types of social issues and these types of, and that's exactly what he did. And it was like opening this door for me. And so, yeah, after that, I was sold. He did my stats course and I actually enjoyed it and it was great. Yeah.
Wow.
Still there.
So then you knew you wanted to go ahead and go into academia, or did you think about the idea of the financial world?
No, I didn't want to do that at all. So somebody's device battery is low and it's not mine, but I'm getting some kind of thing on it. I don't know who that is, but it's not me. I always knew that I liked teaching things. And I had worked in a couple of programs when I was in high school. I worked at a program, it was a school system for children that were, they used to term them emotionally disturbed children. They were children that had home lives you wouldn't wish on anybody. What happened to them would brings tears to a hardened person's eyes. I mean, it's just horrible. And the kids were resilient and dynamic, and the school system had given up on them. And so they sent them to this one program, and I volunteered in that program. And I learned more about education and teaching than I ever dreamed. And so I always knew I wanted to teach in some form. Law school, I thought I was going to help underserved populations, and that was gonna make me happy. But teaching was what really sold me on academia. That's the only reason I got my PhD. Not that I don't love doing research. I mean, I love the stuff that I've done, but it's really working with students that I like the most.
And how long have you been at Towson?
Oh gosh, a really long time. I just got my invitation for some like 20-year, party. So I guess I've been here 20 years. Yeah, I finished my PhD in 2000 and started here that fall.
So back when that was an
back when
empty field behind
back when you were born, maybe.
And and over your right
looking
shoulder
at your
was
young
Dayton.
face here. Sorry, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, no, I that beautiful new building before you is new. That wasn't there at the time.
That is true. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So I recall that was the overflow parking lot for Bateman's.
It sure was. Yeah.
What kind of classes do you teach there in the econ department?
So I teach, I'm predominantly a microeconomist. So I teach everything from the principles micro. I teach, I've taught the econometrics courses and the stats courses, but my love are the two upper level electives that I teach. I teach the labor economics course, which I'm teaching right now. And that's a lot of fun. And then I teach a course called Poverty and Discrimination, which gets me a lot of interdisciplinary students. And it's fascinating. So you see all these different perspectives pulled in and looking at these same questions and same issues, but just from different perspectives. which is, I think, great for our students, because for people that don't know, economics sits in the College of Business, and our students in the College of Business tend to be a little bit more, I'm going to say, narrowly focused. You know, I mean, they think that business is just all about this, and they don't see kind of the dynamic nature, and kind of this interdisciplinary aspects that are important to business. So it's nice to get those students, and for our students to have experiences like that. Mm-hmm.
Well, I know you have a presentation ready for us on this this pending paper that you are developing with a colleague. So
Yeah.
I'll hand it over to you to run us through that,
Okay.
and then
Okay.
we can do Q&A after that. And I'll just encourage the rest of you continue to please stay muted audio wise while you're not speaking, and then you can throw your questions in the chat, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not gonna share my screen yet. I will do it when I get to the slides, because I think if I share my screen, then you don't see me anymore. So I figured I'd at least stay live with you for a minute. So what I'm involved in a project, and the project has to do with student learning outcomes in the wake of COVID-19. So what happened at Towson is like what happened at universities and K through 12 institutions across the country, is that we woke up one day and all of a sudden campus was closed. I mean, it was literally felt like the blink of an eye, and all of this happened. And so folks like me who had taught courses predominantly live, and that was the way that we preferred engaging with students, was all of a sudden dramatically changed. And I'm going to be quite honest, I'm not very good online, really not. And so we were kind of grasping at straws as educators about what would happen. But none of this is anything that you don't know. What you don't know is that prior to COVID, this colleague of mine and I had been working on a project to try to improve the diversity in the economics department. I am one of 2 female faculty. Our faculty are not very diverse. To be quite honest, we got a lot of white guys. And our department is pretty consistent with other economics departments across the board. And it has an impact on engaging students of color, for women, and economics has a notorious problem at Towson, but everywhere. As a matter of fact, at Towson, we actually do much better than schools in general, but we're not happy kind of with where we are. So this underrepresentation of students is a really big problem. African Americans and Hispanics make up only 5 and 9% of bachelor's degrees in economics. And women are only 30% of our major nationwide. The lack of diversity creates this pipeline problem, we call it, which then means that the faculty don't represent the population at large. And so it's not very inspiring for an African-American female who's thinking about economics to have 3, 4, 5 classes in a row with a white male faculty. She doesn't get able to see, she's not able to see herself in the field. And so this colleague of mine decided that these kind of differential experiences across student groups perpetuates this homogeneity of faculty, right? And so we thought about what can we do to try to increase the kind of minority participation in class, but also within the major. So thinking about underrepresented groups wide and broad. And so we found that there were really 2 different things within the field that seemed to be effective. There were these role modeling and nudges. And so The role modeling is having somebody who is more diverse come in and speak to class, or try to pull those people into class in a meaningful way. And then the nudges are like an email to students. It could be encouraging in some way. It could be an informational nudge, telling them about how they're doing relative to other students. And there's kind of this growing, very recent bit of literature about this. I mean, this stuff is all published 2018, 2019, 2020. And these nudges have really predominantly been used to try to encourage female engagement in the major. And so what we were doing before COVID, pre-COVID, was we were trying to test some of these. So we had recruited all of these young, dynamic, diverse female alum to come in and talk to our principal students. And we were sending email nudges to students. So we were letting them know how they did on a test and how they ranked relative to other students in their section. And then for students who did well, we would tell them about the Econ Society and the Econ major and encourage them to talk with their faculty member.
So principal students would be like Econ 101 students?
Yeah. So we did it in every single section of Principal's Microeconomics. And that's the usual starting point, right, for students in econ, in any field. And so it's the micros, like the small picture stuff, macros, the bigger, micros, the small picture. So we were testing this, and we had these nudges, and we had these alum coming in, and everything seemed to be great. And then COVID happened, right? So, so I am, if you can't gather, I'm here 20 years. I haven't made full professor because I don't publish as much as I need to do that. But I am incredibly committed to students. So I have the largest number of students that have done independent studies under me, that have done a thesis. I help with job placement one-on-one with students. And I became worried when COVID happened because some of my advisees seemed to disengage. And doing a little bit of research, what I found is it was my my first gen and my my low income students that were disengaging from me as their advisor, but also in my classroom. And so I touched base with some of these students, and what I found is they were caring for family. One had been designated by her family to care for her uncle, who has no Wi-Fi. She couldn't tap into class. She was out for 3 weeks. She got designated because she was a woman to care for this uncle. And that's what the family decided to do. So I noticed that these students were ghosting, and I noticed this kind of logic behind it. And so this colleague of mine that had this other project, we applied for kind of a shift for our IRB, our human subjects application, and said, can we use this to kind of investigate this kind of ghosting phenomena to see if it's tied to any of these other characteristics? Now this brought me back because a lot of my initial research was on personality traits and labor market outcomes. And some of the really interesting things I found there is that the interpretation and the outcome from your personality is compounded by your socioeconomic status. So for instance, if you are an aggressive student, this is from age 5 up, you're aggressive in school, you're in other kids' faces, you tell the teacher where to go, you are bossy. And if you are a white male from a high income family, that gets painfully rewarded. And those very same behaviors for coming from a child who comes from a low socioeconomic status family are very heavily penalized. There's also a split between men and women. And so I felt like I was coming back to my kind of interest in looking at these things from this differential perspective, that this shift to, everything online is going to go better for some students than for others. And again, this isn't rocket science, right? I mean, this is what most people thought. But I wanted to evaluate it. And so, so what this study really does is it looks at kind of how significant these kind of interrupted events, things like the COVID pandemic, are for student outcomes. So might they widen some of the gaps that we already see in terms of interest and in terms of performance in the economics major? And then might there be interventions that could dampen the effect? So the secondary thing we were looking at is, well, could some of these interventions that we run actually improve or shrink the negative effects? Thinking long-term, once kids come back, if we could do some of these things to try to shrink the gap a little bit faster. So before I get to kind of talking about our study and what we found, what I wanted to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go through kind of some of what we already know about what's been happening as a result of the pandemic, because this larger picture in terms of the impact of this pandemic is really important in thinking about what's going to happen. Okay. Now I have no idea how to forward this. So let me see.
I think if you whatever is happening on the screen where you have the slide up,
there we
it'll
go. Track
that on Zoom. Yeah.
There it is. I don't use Zoom in the classroom. I use something else. So this is all new to me. So where this all started, kind of thinking about these student learning outcomes, was also in part some of this, what you see in the media, right? This is just from the New York Times from July 2020, this image. There was an article associated with it. And the article was talking about the disproportionate impact on women from COVID. Working women were now required to also help educate their children. Now, as an economist, I look at this and I think, oh my gosh, this is, like the disproportionate impact on women, right? So right here, and then this impact on the macro economy, oh crap. But what people missed, I feel like a fair amount of, is looking at that picture and see that kid that's holding her hand. So that mom is trying to do a whole lot of things at the same time. And what that's going to do in terms of, filling in as a teacher while she's already overburdened, what's that going to do? Not just for the mom, that's a separate conversation, but what is it going to do to that child in terms of their educational outcomes? So I pulled up some data on kind of what we know. We know that attendance in school matters. So the more frequently students miss school, the worse their performance is. No big surprise. And what we see are these big numbers, this more than 10 days. Well, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to realize kids have been out for more than 10 days. My students have been out of school for an entire year. Okay, so my son's at Delaney High School. He left the day before his first lacrosse game in 9th grade. And their season doesn't start again until after spring break. And in terms of the impact that has on student learning, there was a really interesting study by the Brookins Report that looked specifically at math testing by grade level. It compared fall 2019 to fall 2020. And what it reported is that these findings are a devastating impact on students. And so this drop between fall 2019 and fall 2020 was consistent, right, across these grades. What you will notice, though, is that the gap looks a little smaller here in grades 7 and 8. And that's going to be important later on when I look at college level and the impact at higher grades. So clearly students are learning less as a result, but that's not a surprise. That's kind of the common sense that everybody knew. And so this was actually done by McKinsey and Company. So this was their best estimate in terms of the losses depending upon the scenarios. So they had a scenario of kids returning in the fall 2020. Well, that didn't happen. January 2021 didn't happen, at least for my students in public school in Baltimore and Maryland. And scenario 3. So they're somewhere in between here. Now, what I really like about this is how it's showing this widening gap. So this shows the gains for the typical in-person, as well, if you notice, the low quality versus average remote learning. Now, why this is important is because this difference in the quality of remote learning is fairly wide. Not all of it is the same. Remember, I told you in the beginning, I'm really bad online, right? I'm not going to say I fall into the low quality because I try to compensate with other things so people don't just listen to me. But there's a real difference in the quality of remote learning that students are getting. And then obviously no instruction being the worst. Now you may be looking at this and saying, well, nobody's getting no instruction. Hold on, there were people in there. So in thinking about why this is important, right? Those students that are getting that low quality level of education on the last slide, those students are also disproportionately low income students. They come from families that are in the bottom 20 or 25% of the income distribution. And so how this graph is important is because we think about those are the students that are going to have the largest negative impact on them from this COVID academic interruption, right? Here's data on bachelor's degrees, right? We keep talking about how we're educating more and more kids are getting a degree. Yeah, absolutely right. And the numbers are up for every quartile, okay? However, if you look at the change in the numbers, they're much more significant in that top income quartile. So in terms of more kids going to college, it's not disproportionately from the bottom end. So we're seeing, again, this data itself is not new, right? But this discrepancy in terms of bachelor's degrees completed and household income. And then you add on what we just saw on the last slide, that low income students are already underrepresented. Oops, I think I might have, yeah. So the next slide, in terms of the impact, I mean, how is this kind of tied to what I was looking at? What we see is that this impact isn't across the board. It's going to disproportionately hit certain groups in the population. And so that same McKinsey report looked at this learning loss. And what you can see is, the overall numbers, they break it down into 3 different groups, right? So they have students that have above average or average remote instruction, everything down to no instruction at all. Now, remember I said before, is there anybody that doesn't have any instruction? Sure is, right? If you look here, 20% overall of the population has no instruction going on, no educational instruction happening, right? But it is disproportionately Black and low income kids. So you're talking about, these are the very kids that are underperforming to begin with in lower quality schools and now are getting low quality remote instruction. So when we look at kind of the learning lost, the difference between white and Black or white and Hispanic, the learning lost in months is almost double for Blacks and Hispanics. It's at least 50% higher for Hispanics than it is for whites. And it's twice what we see for low income households than we see overall. So the learning loss is not nearly as great for those at the top of the income distribution. So in all this fear about what's been happening of COVID, people are tempering it by saying, oh, it's okay, everybody's being hurt, right? All kids are facing these pains in education. And it's just simply not true. They are disproportionately being felt by low income African American and Hispanic households. So the learning lost in terms of the dollars, right? So what I really liked about this publication is they put it in dollars. So what is this going to mean, right? Because if I tell my undergrads, you lost 5 months of learning, right? They don't really care. But down here, it breaks it down into the learning loss and the dropouts. Okay, and this is important because when I talk about our study, what you'll see is that one of the things we're interested in and following up on is this dropout rate. We're very concerned, right? So virtual learning with all of the frustration leads to an increased likelihood of students withdrawing. And so the dollar value, the lifetime lost earnings from just the learning loss for African-American children, 3.3%, right? It's twice for Blacks what it is for whites, okay? For low-income households, 4%. And then you couple that with the higher dropout rates and the lifetime earnings for Black children decrease 18%. It's 18 cents of every dollar. Now, again, it's not zero for anybody, right? But it's much larger dollar value of the learning loss and represents a larger percentage of lifetime earnings for African-American families and for low-income families. So I shared this with my students in class today because in my labor economics class, we were talking about the value of education. And what I shared with them is each year of education on average increases your earnings about 10%. So in the literature, it's anywhere from 8 to 13% per year, right? So you see why you get a bachelor's degree. 4 years, it's going to increase your earnings 40%. But there's also a macroeconomic impact. Again, why we care about the number of college grads is because it helps more than just my income as a college grad. There is this macro or macroeconomic impact. So a 1 percentage point increase in the number of college grads increases their wages a little bit, but that's inconsequential. What it does is it actually has these positive externalities. It increases the wages for those with less education. Why? Because they work together in the production process. So you have a college grad who's hired as a manager. Well, they need somebody else to work at the firm, somebody for them to manage. So it increases the demand for low-skilled labor. So you can see that education matters personally, but also on a macro level. So when we're thinking about something that disrupts the likelihood that somebody will be successful in completing a degree, we're not just talking about cutting their earnings, we're talking about a larger scale macroeconomic impact. So this slide just looks at kind of this dollar value, right? And what I really like about this is it puts a variety of things all in these same 3 scenarios. Now, what we know is we're somewhere between scenario 2 and 3, right? So my kids are at least going to go back 2 days a week after spring break, right? And so what that means is that the learning loss is somewhere between 6.8 and 12.4 months of schooling, right? So they've lost almost an entire year of learning. Perhaps more important on a macro level is the number of high school dropouts that's going to result from this. You're talking about 800,000 additional high school dropouts, right, as a result of COVID. GDP loss, $200 billion. Annual earnings, again, $150 billion as a result. So this idea that disrupting education only impacts the outcomes for an individual is really naive. This idea of either a mismatch or a failure to educate the population has an enormous macroeconomic impact. So this is some research. One of the things, in addition to the learning loss, what we also find is that there are groups that are disproportionately hit by COVID. And that is folks that live in densely populated areas. And so what we see is those densely populated areas are disproportionately African American and Hispanic, right? And they're also those groups that have the largest learning loss, right? So in addition, so beyond just the educational impact, we have a higher percentage in these groups that are getting COVID, that are getting sick. So this can lead to lost income, permanent disabilities, challenges with finding employment again. And so these numbers are not from my work, but what these positive numbers and all these stars mean is that they're statistically significant, right, to a very high degree. So that has to do with how sure they are of these results. So neighborhoods that have a higher percentage of Black, Hispanic, or Asian in that area have a higher incidence of COVID, right? They're more densely populated areas. And you can look at simple models. And if you go to the right, the model just gets more complicated. It puts more things in it. And what you find is that those parameters generally stay, in particular for Black and Hispanic. And so it's more than just this learning loss. We also see that the job loss is disproportionately felt by those with lower levels of education, right? The truth is those with a bachelor's degree have been pretty well protected, right? Not only are they predominantly able to work from home, right, where they're not exposed to COVID, but they also have a lower probability of having their job either lose them, downsize them, or lay them off in some form. So what we see is we see those with high school or less have a much higher percentage of job loss. They disproportionately feel the impact of COVID. The truth is you look at houses in upper income areas, I got folks north of me that are putting in pools. They have a vacation house. They've done exceedingly well during COVID. They've had no impact to their household income. If anything, they're saving more money because they're eating at home more often. Whereas families that live and work in service providing industries where they were piecing together multiple jobs, one or two of which may have fallen by the wayside, not only are they putting themselves in harm's way, but they're also losing hours. So they're hit disproportionately by COVID. And so where this kind of all ties into this project that I worked on with my colleague is looking at kind of beyond education, how has kind of this impact of COVID differentially impacted students in different grades and households with kids in different grades, right? And so what we know is that because of COVID, educational patterns were disrupted. So K through 12 enrollments were disrupted. But what's really interesting to see is that the greatest interruption was in low levels of education. This is kindergarten, pre-K. This was the greatest disruption in terms of just enrollment. And what we saw is that as you moved up, as you get to high school, enrollment really isn't changed much. Now, that doesn't mean that students via online learning didn't, spend a year not learning anything. I'm not speaking from experience of my 15-year-old son. But what we see is it hasn't made a dramatic impact on enrollment. These are the kinds of studies that made us think, maybe we won't see a big college impact. Because what we specifically were looking at, and that's, my next slide here is kind of what did our study look at? Well, we were originally looking at trying to motivate kind of disenfranchised and disengaged groups back into economics, right? So we ran this whole study and then COVID hit. And so we were following over 1,400 undergrads who had all taken a principles microeconomics course. So we saw them in the fall, then we saw the new group in the spring, but that spring got disrupted. And what our plan was to follow these students throughout their time to see whether or not these interventions that we used had an impact on the likelihood that they took more economics classes. Right? So because of COVID, what we did, everything shifted to fully online. And we decided to say, you know what? As a result of what I was seeing with my advisees and what I was seeing and other faculty were seeing with students ghosting and this pattern to it, we shifted our study over to look at how this type of disruption can have an impact. Now, the goal of our study is to look long-term. So I have some preliminary findings here from the first semester, but really what's going to be interesting is to see how this disrupts the educational process for these students in future years, right? Because we had these students last spring when everything got disrupted. Now there's been a year, right, of online classes, right? And that data I literally just got last week. So the university just freed it to me. So I have it from the fall, I'll then get it from the spring, but we're going to analyze what happened in the fall to those same students we saw last year. We're going to look at what happened to them in the fall. But what I have here is just kind of the instant snapshot from what happened from the spring. And so we were looking to see whether there was a differential impact of this move to online. And we were looking at two specific things. We were looking at grades and we were looking at this pass-fail. So the president at Towson decided that she would offer the option for students to take the class pass-fail, right? And this was a chance for students who maybe had like kind of a low grade, that they didn't want it to hurt their GPA, that as long as they were getting a C or better, they would pass the course, and that would be great. So we were interested in looking at the differential impact of that. So what we did is we followed these students. We have information on how they were doing at the beginning of the semester, how they did at the end, so we know what grade they got, and then we know if they chose pass-fail. And so we were interested in looking at whether or not this move to fully online disproportionately hurt any groups, right? Kind of right out of the gate. And so, so just some of the results of things we found so far. So first of all, the not surprising things that we found. First of all, women did better than men in economics. That's nothing new, right? Women are disproportionately afraid of economics. They don't choose to major in it, but they are our best students. Go figure, I can't put it together, right? So females continue to outscore males. The second thing that's not surprising, the largest grade increase was among high income families. Because what we overall found between the fall and the spring is that spring grades were actually higher on average. We thought for sure they'd be lower, but they weren't. They were higher. And so women scored higher than men. The largest grade increase, not surprisingly, was among high income families. Why is that not surprising? They had better access to technology. They were less constrained with the requirement to having to work to help support their family, right? And then we also saw that students were more likely to take the class pass-fail if they were either from a low-income household or an African-American male specifically. Right? Again, these were not surprising. Why? Low-income students generally don't do as well, and African-American males generally have lower grades. So it wasn't surprising for us to see these results. Right? What was surprising was that we saw these higher grades in the spring than in the fall, right? So we had this big disruption. Why was all of a sudden the average student was doing better? We think faculty were a little bit easier, right? It was first out of the gate. We didn't know how to do anything online education wise. And so we were pretty easy. So higher grades, maybe it shouldn't have been surprising, but it was. We saw that um, uh, while African-American males were more likely to pass-fail, the largest increase in GPAs were among African-American students, right? So the largest gains happened for African-Americans, almost entirely driven by the women though. Now that shouldn't be surprising because remember how this project started, right? We were trying to engage disenfranchised groups, right? Women being among the big one, right? But also the particularly interesting finding is that there were people who did not take it pass fail, but should have. And those were, I need to back up because I'm giving my stuff away too quickly. And those were low income households. They didn't take advantage of the pass fail to save their GPA. So the grade in this class, by getting the grade rather than pass fail, it had a negative impact on their GPA. African-American students as well didn't take advantage of the pass fail, and non-athletes. So were faculty more lenient? Maybe online was easier to cheat and that's why students did better. We don't know. But that last finding, right, that some folks didn't take full advantage of this pass-fail to kind of spare their GPA, could be lack of knowledge, right? So these are groups that would be more likely to be kind of disenfranchised from information on campus, and so may not have been aware of the opportunity. And so what we're doing is we're following these students. So our story's not over, it's barely started. We're going to follow these same students that we had last year and look at their academic choices, their performance. We're going to look at retention. That's something we're very concerned about. We're going to look at the time it takes them to complete their degree. And what we found is the impact may just not be visible in just half a semester. So while we found some of these things, we think that there may be larger impacts farther down the road from this increased disruption. These are the outcomes from the disruption from a half a semester where students started in person. We're curious to see what happens over the year where they were entirely online, you know? So students toughed it out for one semester, maybe faculty were generous, but you know, by this past fall, students fell into one of two groups. They either had support and resources, technology, limited family commitments, or they were on the other side, right? They didn't have the resources and support they needed, had technological problems, and didn't have the family, the commitment, the money. They had a part-time job or a full-time job to support their family. And so we're going to have this split is our gut. And we're going to have this widening or bigger spread of some of these small findings we had in just one semester. So we expect wider gaps in outcomes, dropout rates, overall GPA, larger time to complete degrees, which means the degree takes longer and costs more for students that come from lower income households or African American or Hispanic households. So that's kind of where we are. So I tried to be cognizant of the time to leave time for questions, concerns, or advice that people may have. This is kind of a 5-year project for us to look down the line and say, you know, what's happened and what needs to be done to potentially make a difference. You know, in terms of, you know, kind of interrupting this process. Now, I will say that our department is 100% behind using young alums to come in, because our preliminary findings on that is young alum engage students, and particularly students of color and female. And so I'm thinking we're going to use that as a technique to try to re-engage many of those students. But I would welcome any input. And before I do, I want to thank Jason so much for offering me the opportunity to talk about this somewhere, and also to Rob for all the behind the scenes stuff that he does, so to make this happen. So thank you both. So questions?
You're welcome. Thank you. Yeah, and I think we're a small enough group. If you've got a question or comment, go ahead and just unmute. And I'll ask all of you actually to video unmute now as well, so we can see you. But please do. And I want to welcome too, by the way, Keith Peters is here. Keith is a Baltimore County school teacher. He taught both of my girls 5th grade at Cedar Mere Elementary. So I reached out to a few teacher friends to let them know about this. So thank you, Mr. Peters, for joining us.
We love our teacher friends. Oh my gosh.
Dennis, I know you had one question.
Yeah, let me find it again.
Yeah.
While you're doing that, I'll ask one, if I can, Melissa. I've been told that that the tenor of interactions at professional meetings of economists is of an especially, and you're smiling because you know what I'm going to ask you, is of an especially vigorous nature, and that is experienced negatively. That may be one reason why women feel less welcome in the field. What's your experience been?
Well, I'll share with you. There's actually some research on that. Not only is the input, you call it vigorous. Yeah.
Trying to be polite.
It was polite. I appreciate that. But there have actually been studies done on it, not just on presenting research, but defending dissertations. And the questions are considerably more aggressive in nature when it's a female presenting her research. So I haven't seen a lot of research looking at race in particular, but I can imagine it would be identical. So it's a different type of interrogation, I'll call it, of your research. When you're female, you're in an underrepresented group. Yes. Yeah. My experience would support that, but that's exactly what the literature says.
Yep. Dennis, did you find your question? Then I see Ralph is unmuted. Ralph.
Kind of early on, in the slide, differential impact 2.
Yeah.
You know, the first quartile and the fourth quartile were sort of where you might expect them to be, but it looked like the third and the second were swapped. Like,
did they have it? Was it backwards on there?
Oh, I don't know. I just assumed the results were different.
For the differential impact 2, no, the third income quartile, it went the top income, then the third, second, first.
And that's sort of second and third are sort of swapped from where I might have thought they would be.
Oh, really? The second is second from the bottom, right? So that's next to the bottom.
Okay.
The top quintile is not the first. Let me stop there. Yes, the bottom quintile is the first.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes. That makes all the sense now, right?
Raph, and then I see Peter, you're unmuted as well.
Hey, so this is fascinating. I learned so many things. So I had 2 kind of questions. One is just a clarifying one, and I was just wondering, when you say that there are students who receive no instruction, I was wondering, what does that kind of look like? What does the literature kind of discuss about that? And then I just wanted to maybe hazard a hypothesis about why women might do better in economics classes, and just see if you know if this guess is off base. I was wondering if there's some kind of selection bias. So women are told they're not good at math, and so you have to be really, really confident in your math skills to go. Whereas lots of men think they're really good at math, and then they'll find out that they're not. Yeah. So that's what happens.
Yeah. So first, your comment about the no instruction, I would have looked at that maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago and gone, oh my gosh, no way, right? I mean, just no way at all. However, I will tell you, my son's at Delaney High School, and he's missed classes, mind you, but from what he tells me, and again, this is just hearsay, right? Half the class never shows up, never. So this idea of ghosting doesn't just mean that it's not available, it means they're not engaging with it, right? Now, it can be that ghosting happens in part because the students don't have reliable technology, or because don't want to turn on a microphone or a camera at their home. And disproportionately that hurts low income households. So those kids are less likely to have the technology, to have the Wi-Fi. It took weeks and weeks for Baltimore County, and they did, I think, was a great job at giving like Wi-Fi to everybody. I mean, it's like those little, take home, and those were expensive, but they had to. It was the only way to do it. But some of those kids that have those, they have Wi-Fi, but they're sitting down in their kitchen. There's kids screaming and yelling. There's parents doing 15 million. There's no place for them to study. And so they choose not to sign in. And so my son has some of his friends that don't ever sign in, ever. So yeah, so I think a fair amount of it is that in areas where kids aren't doing anything. But I also know that that some of that data is from 8-9 months ago, and my son had a teacher who never showed up, never ever once live, and to me that's ghosting. Now she did it, but it's happening sporadically, and my son's at a pretty good high school. I can only imagine what it looks like at some of the rural schools across the country. And the 5th District reports that are done by the Richmond Fed are just that, that there are kids that are completely disenfranchised from education right now.
Let's let me, because we're coming to the end of our time. Let me, Peter, you'd been unmuted. I don't know if you have a question, but if you want to ask yours quickly, and then Kenneth, I'll ask you to ask yours, and then I'll let Melissa respond to both of them.
Yeah.
No, I just unmuted to join the crowd, but I don't have a question.
Okay.
So I will cede my
All right,
time
Kenneth,
to
then.
somebody else.
Okay.
Hey, my good friends, Rob and Peter Gross, how you doing?
Yeah. Hey.
Quick question, and I know this is not really your research that you're doing, but I'm one of those fortunate ones that has a job that I was allowed to work from home.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I like it. And I don't want to go back. How does that affect the workforce? How does that affect, jobs and things? I have the ability to work from home. My performance is great. Everything's going great. But what can you say about that? What have you found about, the morale of people that are working from home and they like it and they're still performing?
Yeah. I think there's a lot more to it. So absolutely, there are some people that are much more effective in this environment. It's a certain type of personality. And some people can do it and be very effective at it. And there are not large consequences for them personally from pulling themselves away socially.
It helps my paycheck when I only have to put gas in the car.
Yeah. Or you don't have to buy lunch. Trust me, my husband's company just saved $1 million a year by keeping him and some other folks home.
But what do you do? What do companies do going forward with that dilemma?
They save a ton of money. That's what they do.
Is that the new thing? I mean, like people see
Yes. Yes. Yeah. It's the new thing to keep employees home, to be totally honest. It's a huge savings for firms. Huge. And they're finding that workers are just as efficient. Now, what's coming out, if you look at the literature, what's coming out is that workers are just as efficient, but they are much more burned out. There are some really significant negative psychological consequences and social consequences from working from home and having all of your meetings on Skype or Zoom or whatever your online format of choice is. And those have implications for how we interact as a population. So as you become working from home and you interact less socially, then when you are interacting, you can become less sensitive to others' needs, to difference, to the world around you. And those are really legitimate fears, in particular for young adults. So when we think about young kids, I mean, I think of my son going back into school, and I mean, I'm just hoping he showers before he gets on the bus. I mean, it's, a year at home, it's a free for all for what he'll do. And I think as adults, there's no exception. I mean, there's probably not a person here who has anything other than sweatpants on, right? I mean, it's a roaring joke about these Zoom meetings where we're all dressed up here and everybody's in sweatpants, right? But it changes in some ways for better, but in some ways for worse. Our capacity to sympathize, to empathize, to interact, have social and economic consequences to them.
All right, Karen Morrissey wants to make a quick comment, and then I'm going to finish up with a couple fun questions, and then we'll be done. Karen, go ahead.
Okay. So Melissa, I ran with you at Williams, and I
Yeah.
also live in Baltimore County. My sons both go to Towson High School.
Okay.
But I was wondering how you account for the inequalities that existed before the pandemic, because when I felt in some ways that the pandemic highlighted the inequalities, because when Baltimore County announced that there were some kids who didn't have access to Wi-Fi at home, I realized that had been affecting them,
all along the way.
It wasn't just a problem now. Yeah, because they all had devices. So much of the homework was online. How were they doing their homework before that?
Right. In some ways, COVID forced their hand. So, and that was the point I was making before, Karen. It forced their hand to that Baltimore County schools became responsible to provide that technology to enable students to interact from start to end of the school day. The school doesn't have any responsibility, and the county doesn't have any responsibility to engage them after school hours, right? So giving them those devices prior, they could exempt out, right? So now that the kids needed them to be in school, a requirement. But it's interesting because still low-income students are not in school. So tag attendance to the number of that Wi-Fi device. What they're going to find, not all of them, but a disproportionate number.
Right.
It's not all they needed. They needed more than a Wi-Fi device. They needed a quiet space. They needed help. They needed somebody to watch them. They needed a lot of other things other than just the capacity to connect. So, but yeah.
Well, as is so often the case when we get together, we're out of time before we're out of things to say to one another. So I want to thank you, Dr. Groves. Just as Rob throws this last slide up, I'm going to limit my fun questions to two. Number one, what was your favorite dining hall? And number two, if you could go back to Williams and take a class, either one you already took to take over or one that you wish you had taken, which would it be?
Oh, those are dining halls. That's easy. I hated all of them. I was not a big fan of the food. I ate a lot of cereal and I ate a lot of ice cream. Those were like my two big staples there. Is it Driscoll? Driscoll. Yeah, we ate there a lot.
The round one. Yep.
Yeah. So they would open Driscoll up because it's a small facility, and they'd open up early for us to eat there before games in the winter. And I always liked it because they seemed to have everything. But other than that, to be honest, I liked all the cereal they had at Mission Dining Hall. They'd have like 8 different cereals out all at the
same time. They did, yeah.
Have them for every meal. I could eat a bowl of cereal for dinner.
And they had on the machines, they had the little sticker that said turn knob to agitate. Yeah. So you had all the anarchists who would just stand there and twist the knob all the time.
Yes. So I would say that. And what was your second question?
A class you would go back, if you could go back and take a one more class at Williams, what would you take?
I could tell you one. I could tell you two. I would not.
Okay, we'll take that.
Yeah. Music 100. Gosh, Lord, I couldn't have been any worse in any class. And I had some bad ones along the way, but that was terrible. You know what? I would have stuck out Russian longer. So I took Russian language in high school, and I took it for my first year at Williams. And from what I know now, I would have stayed in it because by then I would have gotten to history and literature and all the stuff I think I would have really enjoyed beyond just the language. So I think what I was missing my freshman year in Russian, I didn't properly anticipate would come about by my sophomore year because I had some in high school. So I was like, I don't know, Russian 3 by the time I got to Williams. And then I could have done, kind of cool Russian literature and, it just would have been a lot more fun. And I wish I'd stuck it out. I wasn't good in the language, but I wish I'd stuck it out. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for taking the time tonight, Melissa. It's really been a great conversation. And as I said, our next one of these will be in 3 weeks on April 12th, and that will be a midday, not an evening session, because John Fielder, class of '94, is going to be zooming in from Africa, where he's 7 hours ahead, I believe. But he's going to talk about the work that he's been doing as a missionary doctor in Africa.
What time is that one? Oh gosh.
That'll be at noon. Yeah, and it'll be a follow-up on the conversation we had last week. Now, the great thing about these is that they're being recorded and they're being archived. And I have to hope that some Williams student down the road is gonna write a thesis on how the Williams Alumni Office handled the pandemic, and Rob Swan will be the focus of this. He'll be the star.
Jason, you're a rock star, and Dennis O'Shea's on here too. Sorry to interrupt you, but
no, it's all good.
Bicentennial planning and stuff. So we've been busy, but we can't wait to get back to in-person stuff too.
Yep. Well, thank you all for being on, and I hope to see you again. Keep your eyes peeled for the invite with John Fielder, Marty Wasserman, and Bosu Kim. A very good night to all of you. We'll see you in a few weeks.
Thank you, Melissa.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Melissa.
Take care, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.